Severe storm risks are ramping up for many parts of the United States, plus the tropics are heating up for zones like the East Coast. Let's go ahead and jump right into this video by overviewing the active weather zones I'm concerned about with this future radar graphic for the coming days. As we jump ahead out of our Thursday evening when I'm recording this and into the middle of our Thursday night, you can see that there are going to be some dark green showing up for places like Montana as well as in the Dakotas. This is an association with heavier storms that this guidance is depicting, associated with a low pressure system in the area. With strong jet stream energy fueling up this system, it will produce severe weather tonight over the north central U.S. and then once again in the coming days. That's something I'll break down in more detail as we go a little later in the video. One other thing to keep note of is all of this tropical moisture along a lingering front near the southeast U.S. That's going to continue causing problems in the way of at least heavy rainfall and possible flooding from that in the next several days. You can see the evolution of our two active weather areas that I'm especially concerned about by the time we go through the late day time frame on Friday. We're going to likely get more scattered to widespread storms over north central zones like the Dakotas and Minnesota as we go through late Friday in association with that same system up there. There is also going to be more in the way of scattered showers and storms, particularly for zones like the Carolina coastline, the Georgia coast, and through a lot of Florida along that old frontal boundary. Low pressure is going to try and kick up along that boundary as we go into the weekend, and as that general very weak low pressure system tries to push out into the Gulf and multiple layers of the atmosphere, we are going to be seeing a little bit of a stronger flow of moisture coming up through a lot of Florida and into the southern part of our Gulf Coast states. Flooding will certainly be a concern there as we go into the weekend as a result of that, and we will continue to watch flooding and severe weather from our north central system as we go into Saturday and Sunday. You can see Saturday night looks like an active time for zones like the Central Plains, stretching on up into the upper Midwest and parts of the Great Lakes region. That system is going to stretch on up into Canada so far that the front is going to be very extended, so it's going to probably be connected all the way from parts of central Canada back to the southern high plains. As it does that, it is going to be very slow moving on its southern corridor. In fact, it's going to almost stall out. That means days of stronger storms and possible flooding and severe weather from those storms in the nation's midsection. I think severe weather and flooding from that system could last all the way into next week while this thing lingers around. With that being said, I want to now dive deeper into the two active parts of our weather pattern. Specifically, we're going to start with the mainland USA severe weather. In a few minutes, we will talk in more detail about the flooding and tropical weather concerns that we have near the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. On screen is a closer look at the jet stream 15 to 20,000 feet on into the sky. As we track this out through the rest of our Thursday, you can see a stronger flow of jet stream energy. This is called a trough or U-shaped dip in the jet stream that's going to be working out of places like Oregon, through Idaho, and then out into Montana and northern Wyoming. On the southern side of troughs like this, that is where you get the surface low pressure to try and form. That's going to help in pulling up ingredients. So anywhere around and then just to the south and east of this trough, that's going to be a fair game zone for severe weather as we go through our late Thursday. As we continue to see ingredients getting pulled up ahead of that jet stream energy into Friday, we could see more strong storms. In fact, look at how strong that jet stream energy is going to be as it pushes on out into the Dakotas and Minnesota. I'd anticipate very strong storms there within the next 24 to 48 hours as a result of that trough. Once we go beyond Friday and into the weekend, of course, it will elongate a little bit more. That's why the surface front will be doing just that. However, we're going to have enough energy riding through a lot of the midsection regions of the United States that, of course, we will continue to be watching more strong and severe thunderstorms. Let's dive deeper into the day-by-day threats we're going to see across parts of the northern and central U.S. For today, on our Thursday, August 7th, as well as especially our Thursday night, I have issued as high as a level 4 of 7 threat for scattered to widespread severe weather on my ONW severe weather forecasting scale. The threat peaks in the yellow zones in parts of Montana, and then especially out into the Dakotas and Minnesota, where there's also that orange peak part of the risk. That orange is especially due to the wind hazard, where there is going to likely be scattered to locally numerous high damaging wind gusts reported. 75 to 90 mile per hour wind gusts will be possible in the biggest swath of damaging winds that we get tonight. Scattered large hail will also be a concern. 1 to 2 inch stones will be the most common, but we may even see some hailstones reaching 3 inches in diameter. A few tornadoes also look likely, and a couple significant tornadoes could be possible. Let's take a closer look at the ingredients that are helping with the setup. Taking a look at the European model, you can see that there is going to be an elevated core of storm energy developing through the rest of our Thursday afternoon and evening, particularly through parts of the central and eastern Dakotas and into Minnesota is where that energy is set to peak. That's why many of these zones are in that level 4 of 7 risk of severe weather. This daytime heating-induced convective available potential energy is just one ingredient that's going to help the storms. One ingredient set to help these storms possibly become surface-based supercells, at least at their initializing point, is going to be the lower level jet stream kicking up ahead of that stronger trough further up in the atmosphere. These winds are coming in more from the south to the north, and we're likely going to see the strongest flow of these low level winds happening through the central and eastern part of the Dakotas into the middle of this evening. When these winds kind of cross with those winds that are moving in more from the southwest to the northeast with that mid-level trough, that creates what's called wind shear, or rotation of the winds as you go up in the atmosphere. That makes clouds rotate as they grow further on up into the sky, and when you have clouds reaching up to 15 to 20,000 feet plus, they're definitely going to be getting sheared like so. That means that the tornado risk could get elevated, especially before storms grow upscale into clusters. Taking a look at the HRRR model to quickly time some of these bad boys out, you can see that we're likely already going to have some storms evolving over parts of Idaho and Montana and our level 2 and level 3 parts of the risk zone by mid to late afternoon. These storms are probably going to have higher bases because there's less surface storm fuel that's going to be available to them. They're going to be behind the peak of our trough. They're going to be behind the peak ingredients ahead of our low pressure system. That puts them in an environment where tornadoes are going to be less likely, and we're likely going to see more in the way of wind and hail as the main hazards. Further east, though, especially these initial cells that we start seeing out of far southern Canada and then into North Dakota, these are supercell storms that could produce a very large hail of up to 3 inches in diameter, possibly even that evolving tornado threat that gets going through the first few hours of the evening, at least around sundown. Eventually, with time, we'll probably have maybe even more cells across the Dakotas and far western Minnesota than this guidance is indicating for around like 10, 11 p.m. Either way, we're probably going to get a larger, more upscale growth in our storms as we go further into the evening. Some of these storms might have actually initialized in Montana earlier, and they'd kind of pick up the supercells while moving east. Regardless, 1 or 2 stronger clusters of storms should be moving through at least North Dakota and possibly northern South Dakota, as well as into western Minnesota overnight. These storms could produce more damaging winds, and that could be where we get the 80 to 90 mile per hour gusts. Of course, we will be looking at the risk for more severe weather as we go into our Friday, August 8th, as well as Friday night. I have once again up to a level 3 to level 4 of 7 on my ONW severe weather scale for parts of the north central U.S. Scattered damaging winds of 55 to 70 miles per hour look likely, as well as scattered large hail of 1 to 2.5 inches in diameter. That's going to especially include zones like the eastern Dakotas, as well as through a lot more of Minnesota. Into western Wisconsin, we could get some new storms as well going through parts of the afternoon and evening. Even into the overnight, there could be some stronger cells here. The tornado risk is not going to be 0, but it should be lower than our Thursday night storms in these zones. It's a little difficult to see on this graphic, but you can certainly tell that there's going to be an abundance of storm fuel making it very far north across the central and northern plains for our Friday and Friday night storms. This really elevates the potential that we'll get more in the way of strong updrafts and, again, more strong damaging winds and hail through the afternoon and evening. Although the model I'm now showing you on screen to help in timing out Friday and Friday night storms isn't as accurate as the HRRR usually, I think it's still going to do a great job in showing the overall trend that we can expect with storms later through our Friday. Of course, the storms from tonight are still going to be breaking up over central parts of Minnesota, likely into our Friday morning. However, we're still going to have the low pressure system kind of working its way in with time through the late afternoon and into the evening. We're done with the main threats for the western Dakotas by the time we get towards Friday afternoon and evening, but once we get towards probably the late afternoon, evening, and then possibly even the middle of the night, that's when storms should start ramping up out of far eastern parts of the Dakotas and then into Minnesota. The NAM model is indicating once again some significant damaging wind potential for the second straight night. That could include zones like Bemidji in Minnesota down to Brainerd. We've got St. Cloud, maybe even Minneapolis getting in on a significant wind and hail threat. The storms should grow upscale fast, so tornadoes aren't as big of a concern as I noted earlier. However, even into the overnight, there could be damaging winds, and those could impact places like Wisconsin by early Saturday morning. Into the weekend, we'll see more concerning storms each afternoon and evening in particular, as we see that jet stream energy continuing to elongate over the nation's midsection. I'll talk more about some of those storms likely in a future update. For now, let's take a look at how much rainfall is expected just by the time we get through the early to mid part of Saturday. Those storms and the multiple rounds of them possible over the North Dakota, northern South Dakota, Minnesota, and northern Wisconsin region, they're going to pump out a lot of rainfall, and we could get upwards of 2 to 4 inches of rain in these zones where you see the oranges in particular. Of course, that will be on the high end, but wherever we do see that, we could at least see some isolated flooding already ongoing by Saturday, as we see more storms evolving, especially in the Midwest, as we go towards the back end of this weekend into early next week. Places like southern Wisconsin, Iowa, and Nebraska could get a round of possible severe weather, as well as concerning flooding from the higher rain totals. With that being said, let's now shift our attention and take a look at the tropical update for those of you on the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, wherever you may be, even if it's out there in the Atlantic Ocean. I will break down the flood threat from our stationary front in general for the southeast U.S. That's coming up in just a couple minutes. First, though, let's take a look at areas that have the potential of development. We have one guy up here near the east coast of the U.S. This is going to be shifting on off towards the east in the coming days. We've still got about a 30% chance that this turns into something tropical. Meanwhile, there is, as of the time of this video, a 60% chance of something tropical coming out of our weak area of moisture as it is right now that is out in the main development region of the Atlantic. This thing, as you can see from the risk zone, it is expected to curve on up towards the north and west into the coming few days. The one that I'm putting the X on up here with the lower chance of development, it is along that same stationary front that's going to keep the southeast U.S. moist and even stormy through the coming days. This one out here with a 60% chance of development, it is a tropical wave coming off of Africa. I'm sure most of you care about, though, is whether these things are a legit threat to land. So many people are hyping up all kinds of tropical storms and hurricanes that are showing up on rogue model runs heading towards land. Let's take a look at what's actually going on out of these couple of systems that are worth watching right now. You can see that as we play out the GFS model through the coming couple of days, not too much will be happening, but by the time we get towards around our August 9th, so Saturday in the morning, we are going to have a low pressure system likely right in the middle of our possible development zone just off the east coast. This is going to be a small low pressure system. It's riding along the old frontal boundary in place, and with surface high pressure in place near the mid-Atlantic of the U.S. right in here, we're likely going to see, in general, the system kind of get blocked out and forced to move on over towards the east. That won't be a big concern, so then we take our attention and turn it to what's going to be possibly going on out here in the middle of the Atlantic. You can see the GFS model certainly shows something moving right through the middle of that development zone of concern by the time we get through August 10th and into August 11th. Overall, this model and many others aren't developing anything significant out of this, but if we do get a tropical storm or a hurricane to form, it will be, in general, kind of moving in the trajectory to where some of you up there in maybe the northeast U.S. could even be concerned. The good news with this thing is that as of right now, the steering currents look to start sending it back off towards the east by the time we go towards the middle of next week, or possibly even towards the end of next week. This thing would likely be steered away due to the fact that there's going to be high pressure out here in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean that would generally cause any system to curve like this. There's going to be some higher pressure near the east coast of the USA, just kind of blocking it out more than likely as well. I don't see any threat to land out of this possible tropical system as of right now. Chances are, if this yellow area of concern that I mentioned a minute ago doesn't turn into anything, then this storm will be the E-named storm. We've had a few already. They've just been weaker and nothing of major, concern. You can see the GFS model curving this thing pretty much out to sea, maybe not even affecting the far eastern outskirts of Canada, as it would just be zooming on up there towards Europe down the long run if it does indeed develop and turn stronger. One thing that I can tell you about that's not very good to have close to home, though, is the continued stationary front. Even though this isn't necessarily going to mean any sort of tropical development, in fact, it is unlikely to. Of course, the weaker area of low pressure we see trying to move through Florida on Friday, and then eventually through more of the Gulf and southeastern U.S. as we go into Saturday and Sunday, it is going to mean a mess of rainfall. You can see it just happening, especially each afternoon and evening. Look at this on our Sunday afternoon with, in general, some weaker low pressure probably sitting somewhere near Alabama, North Florida, and southwest Georgia. We're going to get that pull of moisture on its southern and eastern side. That's going to lead to some stronger showers and thunderstorms working up through Florida, Georgia, and a lot of the Carolinas. Flooding should be the main concern that we get out of all of this heavy rainfall in the coming days, but really, even as we continue to see next week come around the bend, we're going to see more storms impacting the southern and southeastern U.S. It's already been wet in a lot of these zones recently, as this front has been lingering around for days already. The rain totals definitely are the biggest concern. You can see by looking here at the total precipitation forecast from the Weather Prediction Center that just through the end of the upcoming weekend, we are expected to see over an inch or two of rain down in southern and southeastern Georgia. We've got the far low country regions of South Carolina getting an inch or two at the minimum, possibly 3 or 4 on the higher end. We're going to see 3 to 4 inches widespread across the peninsula of Florida. Even as you get on up into some parts of the central and eastern panhandle region, we're going to have at least 2 or 3 inches being expected. You know there will be locally higher totals when you have Florida downpours in the forecast. So some zones could get over half a foot. That's going to cause at least street flooding, possibly even some bigger issues with, of course, any of the local creeks and rivers and streams. You can see that by the time we get as far down the line as around Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, as far west as Louisiana, Mississippi, southern Alabama, flood threats could be evolving. This is just a messy time for zones like the southern and southeastern U.S., there's no doubt about it. With that being said, that brings me to the end of most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about in this video. Let's talk about a few broader things going on across the country before we close out, though. One of those being the total precipitation forecast on the broad scale. This is through the next 144 hours as of the time that I'm recording this video on the middle of our Thursday afternoon. As we go through the next 6 days or so, we're not going to be seeing very much rainfall at all, stretching through the far south central plains. So in places like Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas, we're going to have a lot of the Ohio Valley staying free of the heaviest rain, and that same will go as you going up here into some parts of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. These are zones between our 2 active weather zones that we're going to be watching as we go through the next 5 to 6 days. Not that this is unusual, but out west it will also be very dry as we go through the next several days. Oregon, California, Nevada, and Utah, behind some of that dipping jet stream energy, you will be very dry as we go through at least the midpoint of next week. Here's a quick look at some of the temperature trends that will be affecting your area as we go over the next 4 days or so. The first couple of days I want to talk about is Friday into Saturday, so as we go out of the late week time frame into the early part of the weekend, warmer than average temperatures are shifting north over a lot of the nation's midsection. That's especially going on ahead of that low pressure system and the surface front attached to that atmospheric jet stream energy moving in. Temperatures will be getting all the way up through the upper 80s and even into the 90s, and it will be feeling hotter than what the thermometer reads as humidity builds northward across this whole zone. Behind the trough, though, it will be cooler than average in terms of temperatures. We will see some very chilly air up in some of the higher elevations in particular. That includes zones like Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Some of those higher elevations in Montana and Wyoming will still be cooler than average in terms of temperatures as we go into the weekend. We'll see more of those higher 80s and even your 90-degree readings stretching around the Great Lakes ahead of that front by the time we get out of Saturday into Sunday and possibly towards Monday. One zone that will be remaining cooler during this entire period as well, that's near the southeast U.S. when you have clouds and maybe an easterly breeze and some moisture moving in. Can be a little bit cooler than average for this time of the year. That's been a trend for the last several days, and it will continue to be a trend. Here's a very quick visualization of the actual temperature forecast. Here's a day like Saturday, for example. So on our August 9th, we're going to see that big push of warmth going on over a lot of the nation's midsection. So we've got Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, a lot of the Mississippi Valley getting on out towards the Great Lakes. 90s are going to be the common trend. Look at that up there near Marquette, Michigan. We could be near 89 degrees Saturday afternoon, and that would break a record high for that region. Further east, we've got a lot of low and mid 80s up and down the East Coast, especially as you get down towards the Carolinas and Virginia. Being around 84, that's a little cooler than you could be for this time of the year. It can normally be around 90 even into early August. The coolest zone in the country by far, though, again, it's that cooler than average anomaly zone from Idaho and Montana, especially down through the higher elevations of Wyoming and into central Colorado. Some of those highest peaks are going to be in the yellow shaded colors. That means 50s and 60s for forecast highs. That's all I have for today's update. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. I know it's a little longer than some of my videos usually are on this channel. If you enjoyed the slightly more laid back style, let me know down in the comments. And of course, hit the like button if you did indeed like the video. If you want to catch my next update, the best way to do it is to hit that subscribe button and then turn on those notifications so YouTube will ring up your phone or whatever your device you're using to tune in to me from. With that being said, that's all I got for this one. God bless you all, and thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.
One nation weather.